Kadri, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I see it very well.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you everyone. Welcome to How to Break Out the Boundaries of Old-Fashioned Leadership with our guest speaker, Twan van die Kerkhof, who's calling us from Amsterdam today. Welcome, Twan.
Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. Glad to have you here. And we'll just get a few housekeeping things out of the way while we're waiting for a few people still to connect. But if you are experiencing any connection problems, we recommend you try and exit and connect again. That usually solves a lot of difficulties. Hopefully you won't have that problem, but that's something you can try if you do. You can use the chat box to ask a question at any time. We'll try and monitor that, but it may be a few minutes before we see it. We have a Q&A session scheduled after the Twan's presentation, and we also have an invited leader dialogue. We have 4 special guests here today also with us. We'll introduce them a little bit later. And after that, we'll have an open Q&A session where you can ask any question you like. And if you happen to tweet during or after the webinar, here's a hashtag you can use, U of Leadership, and we'll monitor Twitter and look for anything so we can respond to it out there as well. Okay, we have 2 moderators today. My name is Bill Fox, and I'm the co-founder of Container 13. And something we firmly believe in is that we can all choose to be leaders in all areas of our lives and choose this type of leadership that Twan is starting to talk about here today. And I'm also joined by Kadri Matlik. Kadri, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Katri. I'm also co-founder of Container 13 and glad I've been on this journey with Bill. And one of the aim is to map the gap, because we sense that there is a huge gap between 2 sides in organization, which is a management level and the employee side. So we hope that we will be able to bring it closer. And Twan's presentation will link to that. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kadri.
You're welcome.
Next, I'd like to introduce Twan van die Kerkhof. He's the founder of the European Leadership Platform, and I'll ask Twan to speak about that in a few seconds. And he's also the author of 7 books, including The U of Leadership, which many of us have read. It's an excellent book, and we had the opportunity to interview Twan on his book last year. And he's a former journalist skilled at asking very penetrating questions, and having met Twan a year ago and collaborated with him a couple times, he is very good at that. So be thankful he's not asking us the questions today. Twan, would you like to introduce yourself and say anything?
Sure. As you said, I've been a journalist for 15 years, and after that I founded the European Leadership Platform, which is 13 years ago now, nearly. And I did that because I wanted to continue in the field of leadership that I already was writing about. And because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I asked a group of about 40 senior executives and a few non-execs what they did themselves in the field of leadership and what they found lacking. And what I took away from that is that many people said that they missed the opportunity to step back from the turmoil of the day and think about, reflect about the issues that are really important, but that they didn't have the time anymore to think about. And since then we are organizing roundtable dialogues about leadership dilemmas to bring people from various companies and organizations together to jointly reflect about what they encounter in their daily work. So in the basis, in essence, it's ELP is a safe haven for reflection about leadership.
Okay, thank you, Twan. Next, we're going to have a presentation by Twan. That's going to go for 10 or 12 minutes or so, and then we'll follow that with the dialogues by the leaders. So Twan, whenever you're ready to start, please go ahead.
Let's go.
Okay.
As you said, Bill, 2 years ago I wrote The U of Leadership. Next slide. And in that, I came up with the U theory of leadership. Many of you probably know the U theory as it was developed by Joseph Jaworski and Otto Scharmer. And they did it primarily for organizational change, and I applied that to leadership. So in the left leg of the U, it's about seeing with fresh eyes, looking at the world in a different way. And it goes from society to organization to the individual. Then at the bottom of the U, a leader makes the journey inside. I'll say more about that in a minute. And in the right leg of the U, people are bringing it into the world and start to work with their insights. And from there on, they go their way forward, and then again from individual to organization to society. Next slide. Seeing with fresh eyes is looking to the world in a different way. It's kind of a paradigm shift. It's like the time that in the Middle Ages when we thought that the world was flat. Most humans thought that the world was flat, and it was considered heresy to think that the world was round. And it's really looking in a completely different way and seeing that the world is different than you thought it was. And now we find it hard to think that people thought that the world was flat, and how could he do that? It's so weird from what we know now, but at that time it was completely logical. So we have to think in a different way, and also be aware that there was still other people thinking in their way, and that those are incompatible. Next slide, please. We are changing the paradigm of leadership. We are living in an age of change. No, I must say we are living in a change of age. We are going to a different age. There was a time when the agricultural paradigm was predominant in the economy. Next slide. And then we got to the industrial age, where we had factories and started to separate working and living in different places. And next slide. And that age has brought us a lot of wealth. And we are now in the middle of changing that paradigm. We are at the end of the industrial paradigm, and we are moving into knowledge-intensive services paradigm, or into the information age. But we're still in that age where those two paradigms live alongside each other. Next slide. In that industrial paradigm that is characterized by command and control. It is characterized by that you can define what you want at the end of a production process, and that you can ask your workers to leave their brains at the door and just supply their hands and do what you have been thinking that should happen. Next slide. The kind of leadership that is predominant in that industrial age is a top-down kind of leadership which fits with that command and control style. Next. And the hierarchy is the pyramid. The leadership is firmly established at the top and trickles down to all the layers under that, below that. Next slide. We are moving into that new paradigm, that information age, so to say, and that will be a completely different way of leadership that we need there. The key word for me is connect. Connect with a capital T. The vertical of the capital T is to connect within yourself, head, heart, and gut. And the horizontal layer of the T is to connect with others. But we also experience a connection all around us, the Internet of Things, that things are going to connect with each other. We are more than ever connected globally. And you can say, in a sense, that we're all connected. Next. And that we're going from business to business and business to consumer to human to human. Next slide. The key in that new paradigm is trust. We have to work with other people, we have to collaborate with other people, and we have to be able to trust them and let go of the control. Next. Can say that the pyramid is going upside down. As a leader, you're not, people are not going to work for you anymore, but you are going to work for your people. You have to make possible that they do their work in the best way. Next. As Josephine Green, a futurist working at Philips, once said, we're going from pyramids to pancakes, to much flatter organizations. Next. And the leader is not at the top of the organization anymore, but at the heart of the organization. Next slide. And he or she is, and it will, as Karin said earlier, it will be predominantly more a she than it currently is, will be a servant leader to who is shaping the conditions that all the other people in the organization can do their work without having to be bothered about the practical things that they shouldn't worry about. Next slide. That is the way we have to see the world differently. So we are moving into that new age, and the new leadership that is part of that is a much more personal leadership. And you cannot lead anymore in this new age on the basis of power or authority, but only on the basis of who you are. And for that you have to know yourself. You have to know who you are. That's not a new mantra. We already had that. You see here a picture of the Temple of Apollo, where the Oracle of Delphi resided. Know thyself 2,500 years ago was on top of the entrance to the temple. But so it's not a new message, but it's more relevant than ever. Next slide. From there, from knowing who you are as a leader, you have to bring yourself into the world and do practical work in the organization you serve as a leader. And there are a number of practical things that are at the right leg of the U and that I would like to propose to you. One is that you, as a leader, you have to carefully balance action and reflection. Many leaders get caught in the turmoil of the day and don't take the time or don't have the time anymore to step back and reflect on what they're doing. And I think you have to carefully balance action and reflection. You definitely do need action. You cannot only reflect, sit on a mountain and be a hermit and think about everything in the world. You have to act, but then you have to step back and reflect on your deeds. Next slide. The other thing is that you as a leader have to create your own countervailing powers. If you are successful as a leader, people around you will start to believe in you. And before you know, you will start to believe in yourself. And you will not have, you will need the voices of others to talk to you, to help you improve, to keep you learning, to say to you that you're wrong, to give you new ideas. And those voices will stop if you do not very actively seek them out. You cannot say that your door is open as a leader. That's not enough. You have to go out and invite them to talk back to you. Next slide. And as Jim Collins said in Good to Great, which I think is a great book, you have to face the brutal facts. You have to be aware of everything that is happening, not only the good things, but also, and maybe even more so, the bad things. So you have to face everything that is going on, even the things that you rather not see. Next. And slightly different, you have to discuss the undiscussables. There are many elephants in many rooms, things that people don't talk about anymore because they're considered too difficult, too sensitive. And in a board, executives and non-executives, but also other people within an organization have to be sensitive to what might be the undiscussables and put them on the table and discuss them with all the people that are there. Next. The best thing to do that is, I think, in a dialogue. You see a photo here of one of our leadership dialogues. We do them at round tables. A dialogue is much more suited to the complexities of this age, I think, than a discussion or a debate is. In a discussion or a debate, you have two sides, and in a dialogue, you try to bridge the differences. You are open to what the other has to say. You're open to learn. You're willing to ask yourself questions, even if you don't have the answers, especially if you don't have the answers. You're open to it, and that's much more important to learn as a leader than a discussion of a debate makes that possible. Next slide. That was the last one.
Okay, thank you, Twan. Very good, thank you. Yeah, that was a nice overview of what's in your book, and sure matches up with the ideas and things that we believe and do around leadership. And I think next we're going to move right into our invited leaders section. I'd like to introduce our guests here first, and I think they're going to have some excellent questions to kind of expand on the ideas here that Twan was talking about. And first here we have Brandon Jackson. He's an executive leader in information technology. I used to work with Brandon about 7 years ago, and we've kept in touch on leadership issues since then. And something to know about Brandon, he was recently won a leadership award in the Washington, D.C. area. And Brandon would like to say hello and say anything.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be a part of the webinar today. Love the topic, and here to learn and maybe share some insights that will help others. Thanks for inviting me, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Thanks for joining us. Next is David Oddis. I also used to work with David a number of years back, and he's the Senior Director of Quality in the education area. And David is passionate about leadership. And something he probably won't tell you about himself is that he's currently one of the finalists for one of the top technology managers in the Washington, D.C. area. So he's got a lot of things, interesting things going on, and he's very active in speaking out about quality and testing. David, like to say hello?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. That was very kind. Like Brandon, grateful to be here. I'm really interested in learning. I love this topic. I love the excitement about it. I love how it is changing inside and outside of organizations. And I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, Twan, but I have it teed up to do so. And so far, I'm really liking what I'm hearing. It aligns with a lot of what Brandon and myself have talked, and Bill have talked a lot about. So it's really good to know that that we're kind of aligned with where this paradigm shift that Twan is talking about. So thank you, Twan.
Thank you, David. Thanks, David. Next with us is Karin Hurt. Karin is the CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. I recently met Karin through David and Brandon at a leadership breakfast that occurs here in the local DC area. And Karin has a really background in as leadership in her previous work. So Karin, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, thank you. It's exciting to see this as a global conversation, and I'm interested as the questions come in if there's a difference in perspectives on this based on where you sit in the world and what kind of company you work in. I'm very much aligned with all this. My big philosophy all centers around confident humility, and you have to be confident in order to lead like that, and you do need to be humble. So.
Okay, thank you, Karin.
Very well said.
And also with us today is Jimmy Bereolos. Jimmy and I met over the summer through LinkedIn, through some comments we shared on a post on LinkedIn that connected us. And since then, we've been collaborating on a number of fascinating projects and that involve leadership and other things. Jimmy, you'd like to say hello?
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you all and be in connection on and just in dialogue on such an important topic that is actually actively shaping the world we're moving into. And I'm excited about being here with you all to have this dialogue and look at what we can do to accelerate it along.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. And thank you all for being here. Okay, next we'll move right into the dialogues. And first is going to be Brandon and Twan. And we're going to turn the tables on Twan a little bit and ask him some good questions here. And the first one that Brandon had was, how can we lead within an organization that doesn't embrace and value a culture DNA that inspires and engages its leaders and staff?
And Bill and Bill and Twan, I'd like to add to that, just sort of bringing some of the context of the book and the play here. Twan, how does the U of leadership enable you to reach the organization and society level impact in organizations, again, that will will offer resistance to this paradigm transition?
That's a very good question, Brandon, and it's not an easy one to solve. I think culture is a result from the interactions of all people within an organization, and it's very hard to consciously build and change a culture. The extra difficult thing is that excuse me, that paradigms tend to have a habit to fight very hard for their existence, as if they are an organism that doesn't want to die. So the industrial age paradigm, the more it is threatened by a new way of living and acting that is embraced by an increasing number of people, the more the people that are living in the old paradigm and are feeling comfortable in where they are will resist the changes to that new kind of situation, and it won't help to fight against that. The only thing you can do is firmly build onto what you believe, upon what you believe, and seduce people into a new way of acting, a new way of being. So it is really, as you say in your question, it's about inspiring and engaging, and not about fighting against the resistance. That's what I think.
And are there any specifics with regard to the U of leadership, the steps that you laid out there, that would be a particular focus for someone who's dealing with this?
In the U, as Joseph Jaworski and Otto Scharmer have developed it, it's in the first stages at the right leg of the U. It's about about designing pilots and using experiments. So you can use, you don't have to change an organization as a whole. It's impossible to change an organization as a whole. But you can start within small pockets of the organization with experiments of new ways of organizing, new ways of leadership, new ways of collaborating, and see if that works. And if it works, it might be contagious for other groups, and it might become an increasing, it might get to a bigger scale in that way.
Yeah, I've actually had some success in being able to promote and grow ideologies and strategies that were based on some of the emerging thinking, but there comes a time where you can only go so far.
I agree.
And once you have sort of altered the mindset of the people involved there, you know, that contagiousness sets in. There's a huge drop off when you reach that point where you want to go further, but you aren't allowed.
Yes.
And there are implications for that as well for the corporation. Again, for many reasons, the mission will remain strong in the eyes of people, but the ability to contribute and add value, if they don't have that, they may seek it someplace else. So you know there's significant risks that comes along with that. But I guess until we actually cross over, it's something that we're going to have to manage and deal with.
Yeah, I agree with you that the risk is a risk involved, but what is life without risk? It would be boring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
I guess we're not going to get bored. Thank you, Twan and Brandon. Okay, next we have David, Oddis, and Twan. And David's question was, what do you feel are the top 3 behaviors leaders should have or be?
Hi, Twan. I'd like to expand on it because I think you really covered, you actually spoke to this question quite a bit through your presentation, I felt. So staying along these lines, it feels like what we're really talking about here is we're not talking about title anymore. We're really talking about leading by behaviors. And when we talk about the inner journey and the paradigm shift and the reflective approach paired with your age of change of age, behaviors as those changes are happening. What are the behaviors that have changed, and what are the ones that are important now to build out these type of environments that we're talking about here?
Yeah. I think there are many things in leadership that have been important for hundreds of years and will remain important for another couple of ages. But they might become important in a different way. I think the first behavior that is really important is to know who you are as a leader. And I think, as I said earlier, that was already important 2,500 years ago when it was written on the Temple of Apollo. And it has become only more important through the ages, and it's of utmost importance in that new leadership paradigm where you have to make that inner journey as a leader and really have to know who you are as an individual. The second thing, what I think is really important, is that you have to know what you want as a leader and be able to be inspiring about that. Also in organizations with less hierarchy, people, I think, will still be looking to leaders, and they might be leaders who are who still do have a kind of formal hierarchical position, but they can also be informal leaders. They can be agents of change in the system that there is. and people will be looking at other people, and that can be a changing coalition of people to look for direction. And then you have to know what you want for yourself as a leader. You have to have that intrinsic conviction, and from there be able to tell the story and to show the images of where you want to go. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, I think that leaders have to be great listeners. Communicating in the eyes of many leaders is similar to broadcasting, and that's a big no. The communicating has two sides, and one side of it is broadcasting, the other side is listening. Yeah. And you can only learn if you are willing to listen. And leaders have to be great learners. They can never stop learning.
I'm so glad to hear you say that last part. I think most of us on this call are big advocates for the continuous learning. No matter how high the pyramid you get, you have to continue learning. And I love the 3 items that you spoke about here, because they align with the great leaders that I know of. So that fits really well. We want to just touch on the agent of change, and I think this ties Brandon's conversation with you in the difficulties of being an agent of change in environments that are maybe more in that command and control, not really looking at this new paradigm of leadership. Does that kind of fall on the same lines that you can only take it so far?
I'm not sure if I understand your last question. Can you say it again in slightly different words?
So you and Brandon were talking a little bit about, in certain environments you can only promote and take leadership concepts so far for various reasons. And I'm just curious, as when we talk about trying to be an agent of change, you can be an agent of change sitting in multiple areas of an organization.
Yes.
Right, because we're recognizing leadership as a behavior, not as a title. So any individual in an organization can demonstrate leadership behaviors and be this agent of change to help with this paradigm shift.
Yes.
How far do you have any experience with being that change agent within organizations that maybe are still within that command and control mentality?
Yes. Okay. Thanks. Yes, I heard a number of stories from people about their experiences, and let me put it extremely, if you are in an organization and you're the only one or one of the very few who's willing to experiment, who's wanting to do things in a different way, then it's really, really hard, and you tend to get frustrated, and there might be a time that it's just not worth it anymore. You hit a wall. And I know several examples of people who very consciously have stepped down from large corporates and either joined smaller companies or started to work for themselves as an independent entrepreneur and doing things just the way they wanted. And I especially see that with people from Generation Y, people in their, let's say, early 30s. They don't give much time to bosses that don't give them the space to experiment. They get easily fed up and they leave the company. And if that happens a lot within your company, then you're in serious trouble.
Yeah, makes sense. I appreciate the responses, Twan. Good stuff.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Okay, next we have Karin and Twan. And Karen, I thought maybe you should express this question. You might have. I thought it was a really good question, and there's a lot to it there.
I the longest one, right?
Yes.
So, as you know, I was a former executive. I worked at Verizon Wireless for 20 years, and now I'm a consultant, and I'm working in a lot of high-pressure environments with my clients. And I noticed when I read your book, Twan, that you advocated for an hour or two bath a few times a week. And I just started to laugh. I said, "Oh, that seems lovely," but I just it felt very unattainable to me, as an entrepreneur, and I'm working many long hours, and also have children and a husband and community boards and all that. I get it that you need time for reflection, but how would you suggest that people really manage such reflection time into their lives?
Yeah. I completely understand your question. At the European Leadership Platform, we always say to our members, normally as a member of ELP, you should come to a roundtable dialogue at least twice a year. At least, except for if you don't have time, then you should come 3 times a year. So it's of course a paradox. The less time you have, the more important it is to step back and reflect. And I completely understand that you don't have or cannot take the time to take hours a day or even in a week. What works for you and what works for other people is really different. You have to develop your own way to do that. I know some executives who go running each morning. I know some who meditate for 20 minutes each day. The thing is that you have to find your own way which works best for you to sometimes literally get out of your head, stop the racing of your mind, and enter into the silence where the surprises come, where your new thoughts come, or simply where it is silent every now and then. And what I have developed, I have meditated for years, but I don't do it anymore daily. But what I do maybe 50 times a day is just feel how my body feels, what is going on in my hands and in my legs. And that helps me a lot to go out of my mind, stop the racing thoughts, and literally descend into my body and be calmer, be more reflective, find the silence in myself. And it's because I have developed that habit, I can do it in seconds. So you don't always need a lot of time to do that, but you do need a kind of attitude.
Yeah, I understand. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Now, when you say running, now I can get my arms around that because I do run a lot. But I feel like that also gets me points for doing something productive.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Twan and Karen. Maybe this webinar is a timeout for everybody for some good reflection. So I think we can count this as points in that direction. Okay, next we have Jimmy Bereolos and Twan. And Jimmy, your question was, what have you found works well in transitioning organizations to this new paradigm? Jimmy, can you hear us?
Yes, that's my question.
Okay.
Curious. And I'm anxiously and silently listening for Twan's response.
Okay.
Before I respond, Jimmy, can you give me some background to your question?
Sure. I guess what I'm curious about is through your experience, what have you found works well? Like, what are the things that you've gone through and experienced yourself, or that help people come to that more present way of being? or a more reflective state where they have that attitude, but also that directional pull that you mentioned earlier, where people come into that natural place of curiosity and deep listening. I'm just curious, what have you found works well through your experience?
Yeah, thanks. I think a major change like this occurs from two drivers. One is necessity and the other is desire. There is necessity when an organization hits the wall, when there is a crisis and something entirely different has to happen. I know of an American company, 500 million, I think, in revenues, with factories all over the world. They really had a crisis, and all the big consultancies have been in there. They didn't find a solution. A new CEO stepped in, and he decided to try something really different, and got to work with a theory U, and really changed the company over a period of 3 years doing that. So it usually takes either that, a crisis, or a desire, and also that desire usually comes with a new leadership team or a new CEO who wants something, who wants to create something new and brings new energy, brings a new way of thinking. Like you probably know the books by Ricardo Semler, the entrepreneur from Brazil.
Maverick.
Yeah, Maverick is his first book. The 7-Day Weekend is his second one. And he took over the company from his dad. It was a very classic industrial company, and he thought that things could be different. And he just tried, he experimented and tried new things, and he has built a tremendous company out of that.
And what have you found in the ELP? What are some helpful practices or intentions that help create that space during those dialogues?
One is willingness to listen to other people, not thinking that many CEOs fall into the trap that they have to know everything and have to control everything. And simply, well, it's not that simple, but simply let go of that thought that you have to know everything and that you have to control everything. That is helping. Another thing is just trying out new things without knowing where they will end up, but allowing the space that they might end up somewhere that you cannot envisage or even do not want at this stage. It's in one word, it's openness. But
I love
still,
that.
still you have to know what you want.
Mm-hmm. And what do you mean by that? You still have to know what you want.
As not what you want as a clearly defined end result, but what you want as you have to have an internal driver as a leader. You have to have an internal conviction to change something in the world, to add value to the world for your clients, for your employees, and you have to be convinced of that you do the right thing in whatever way you do it, but there is something that you want to bring into the world. That's the one thing that I'm talking about.
And what have you found works well to allow that open space for leaders to find or uncover what is that change they want to see in the world, or it brings them to that point of vulnerability to embrace the unknown and leap and have, and without knowing this, then that's going to appear?
Yeah, then I guess I come back to what I said earlier, that it usually starts with a leader who wants to change something either because of a crisis or because he or she thinks that things can be differently, and from there is willing to start an experiment to open things up to shape a different world in collaboration with the people he or she is working with.
That's perfect. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Twan and Jimmy. Okay, next we're going to go on to an open Q&A session. We have a number of questions that were submitted by a number of you, and Kadri has gone through and looked through some we may want to tackle first. He picked out some good ones, and maybe we can start there. And let's see, the first one was, how can I best believe in my abilities as a leader?
That's a very good question, but also a very hard question. How do you believe in yourself?
Yeah. Is the person who submitted that question online with us and want to speak to it at all? I think it's probably by, I guess what comes up for me, Twan, are taking chances, being open, being willing to experiment and move in that direction of being more of a leader and seeing what happens and learning from that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure, but I can imagine that the person who asked this question might aim at some underlying belief. But maybe I'm wrong. But I read the question as how can I build my self-esteem as a leader?
Yes.
How can I act as a leader based on what I believe is true in myself? And that starts with again with knowing yourself and knowing where you're good at, but also knowing your own weaknesses, being aware of those, and probably trying to compensate the weaknesses that are relevant for the business that you're in the team around you. But before you can compensate them, you have to be aware of them and be open to them, be honest to yourself and to others that you have those weaknesses, if you can call them like that. So I was thinking that the question was around something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is, it's easy to look at leaders and say, wow, they have it all together, and I'm the only one with these doubts. And, working with so many leaders over the years, I will tell you that everyone has those doubts. And sometimes when people try to cover up the vulnerability, that's where it comes out in some of these negative leadership behaviors that we're trying to forge against here. So if you are doubting, if you're doubting yourself as a leader, that's a very natural and human response. And I think if you know that, then you will be more willing to go ahead and lead anyway. Because if you've got important work that you're trying to get accomplished, focusing on the task that needs to be done and your mission as a leader, more so than how you're feeling about being a leader, if you stay focused on that, you will become an incredible leader who people will want to follow.
Totally agree, Karin. Well said.
Yes, very nice. Thank you. Okay, our second question we'd like to bring up here is, this kind of touches on some things we've talked about already, but at the bottom of this list is the question, how can we effectively deal with organizational politics?
Yeah, that's also a tough one. I guess well, it's not the only thing, but the best thing to do is be yourself. And that's not always easy given the organizational politics in some companies. I recently heard the example of the country CEO of a very large international corporation who was kicked out because he basically stood up for his people and didn't want to do the restructuring that headquarters asked of him. And sometimes you have to go with the organizational politics to a certain extent to be able to achieve the aims that you think are right for yourself and for your people. But sometimes you have to admit that there is an end to that, and you have to stay put and to be true to your limits and step out of it.
Okay. Would anyone else like to remark on that one? Okay, let's move on to the next one. And next question, Twan, is at the top of this list. How can we influence change without telling people what to do?
I think that you can influence change the best way by not telling people what to do, but by asking people what they think should happen. And sometimes as a leader you have to take decisions, but sometimes it's like the king or queen in a monarchy does, who has hardly any decision power but wraps around a ribbon around the decisions that are taken by others. So sometimes as a leader you have to listen, to give space to all the voices in your department or in your organization, and let them say what's necessary. And if people are allowed to do that space, they usually come up with things that are not necessarily in their own individual best interest, but in the best interest of the organization or the department as a whole. And the only thing you have to do as a leader is at the end say, yes, we do it in that way.
Yes, very good. I like that, Twan. I
think a part of that too, Bill, is when I read this question, how can we influence change without telling people what to do? I think there's an element of really showing people kind of what to do. Leaders lead by example, and when you see a leader in action, when you see a leader out front, you know, putting these behaviors into action, I think it's easier to get on board with that and to buy into the vision and the environment that's trying to be created there.
Yes.
Another thing to add is that I think with the giving the space and asking, it's being out front in a way of deeply listening and appreciating that person, and in doing those things, people will really step up and share, and it becomes their own, and it is their own, and it's a beautiful thing when that occurs.
Yes, I like to look at this question from a different perspective in that what if you're the person that's not the so-called leader, you're not the visible leader, but you're the hidden leader, but you want to lead change, and you can do that by being the change, by doing things that lead and show an example in a new way. You are the person who listens. You are the person who asks follow-up questions. You are the person that takes initiative with things that'll help make things better and bring change. Okay, anybody else?
This is Jimmy one more time. Something that Twan talked about earlier around inspiring the direction in a story. I think that it's through listening and asking those questions, you create that collective story towards that direction of the future. And it's connecting, I mean, there's brilliant insights in each individual's mind. And it's really creating that space for them all to come together in that clear directional pull so people can make decisions off of it.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, anyone else? Maybe before we go through we have a few more minutes left before we go with any more of these questions. Does somebody have a burning question that's attending here today that would like to ask something? Just check the chat box to see if anything has come in. Okay, I don't see anything.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
I'd like to get Twan's and maybe the everyone's input on something. As we talk about creating the environment needed to transition from where we are to where we need to be, and you sort of pair that up with the millennial charge that's common, and their needs and their needs as well. How do we think about recognition and reward? Because I believe those frameworks are as dated as the thinking that's leading, some of these organizations. As we started out, we talked about the old ways of doing things. I think some of those frameworks are as old as leadership is. And it seems to me that needs to be at the front of our critical strategies as well. I think we need capability strategies. I think we need talent strategies, but I think we need strategies around recognition and reward to be thought about hand in hand.
I totally agree with you, Brandon. I think the system of appraisals that is used in most organizations to sit down with your direct report once a year and tell him or her what you think about her is completely outdated. And that you have to have a continuous conversation about what you like and dislike about each other as an employee and a leader. Also the system of rewards that we have. Obviously, you do need financial rewards and financial recognition, but I think there is much more space also in a kind of formal way for non-financial recognition, because people just like to hear that they are doing something well, and we can build that much more into our behavior than most leaders currently do.
Okay, thank you, Twan and Brandon. We're rapidly approaching the hour here, and so I think at this point we'd like to. I was going to ask. We had a question for people. If you want to respond, maybe you can respond by email or do it on Twitter. But we'd really like to know what was the most interesting or beneficial thing you got off today's webinar. I don't want to hold people past the hour, so I'm going to park that as an email item or something on Twitter that you may want to respond to. It'd be fascinating to see what comes up, and we can all learn from that. So I hope you'll do that and take advantage of that. And Twan, we'd like to thank you very much for taking your time to be with us today and sharing your knowledge and insights with leadership and the work that you do.
It was a pleasure, Bill. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you. And also thanks to Brandon, David, Karin, and Jimmy. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for inviting me, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Twan, good luck. Really appreciate the dialogue and the perspective.
Thanks, Brandon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Twan.
Thanks, David.
Okay, and thanks to everyone who came today and attended. We really appreciate it. Okay, thank you all.
A lot of fun. Bye now.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you.